I'm Sebastian St. James. You do not have to pay tax in Australia, and I'm here to show you how. Under Australian law, there are two classifications: a business where you definitely have to pay tax, and a secret business in the Cayman Islands, where is not a part of this discussion, maybe for a future video, but a hobby is the other classification. Importantly, the ATO does not tax hobbies. So if you're doing a hobby, you're perfectly fine. No tax. If you start an Etsy store, that can be a hobby. If you're monetized on YouTube, particularly if you're a small creator, that's definitely a hobby. If you sell veggies from your garden, that's a hobby. If you monetize a blog, particularly if you're only just starting out, that's a hobby. What about other types of hobbies? If you play Call of Duty, if you watch all the back seasons of Charmed, if you play Ultimate Frisbee with your dog, these are also hobbies, but not what we're talking about. You're not making any money. So how do you know whether you're in business or whether you're actually just doing a hobby? Well, you'll be pleased to know there is not one single definition. There are a series of tests which I like to call duck tests. Does it look like a duck? Does it quack like a duck? Does it walk like a duck? Well, then it's probably a duck. There is no one single factor that determines whether you're actually conducting a business or whether you're just making money out of a hobby. But there is a series, and the more of these that you comply with and meet, then the more likely it is that you're actually doing a business and not a hobby. Firstly, if you're operating in a business-like manner, whatever that means, let's jump into what a few of those could be. Firstly, have you registered a business name with the government? Here is a business registration service where you register businesses with the Australian government. The first thing you have to decide is whether you're a sole trader, a partnership, a company trust, or a superannuation fund. But do you have a business or do you have a hobby? If you have a hobby, you do not register a business name with the government because you're not operating a business. Therefore, technically, you don't have a business name to register in the first place. Well, hang on, if I've got a website, say, and I've got a special little logo, things like that, then am I a business then? No, not necessarily. A hobby can have a website, absolutely. It can have a little logo that you made. It can have a brand name, something you want to call yourself. It can have social media accounts, no problems. And you can register a business name, no. The last one, definitely do not if you're a hobby. Okay, so what about an ABN? An ABN is a unique 11-digit number that identifies you as a business to the government. If you're a hobby, then you do not get an ABN. ABN, Australian Business Number, is strictly for businesses, and hobbies don't need one. Coming up soon, I have a video which will tell you which online businesses that you can start that are the most profitable. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out. Selling to the general public from a hobby is fairly straightforward. They're not going to demand your ABN necessarily, but if I sell to another business, they're going to demand that ABN for sure. And what happens if you don't give it to them? There are repercussions. When a payer makes payments to suppliers for goods or services to the business, those suppliers generally need to quote an Australian business number. If a supplier does not quote its ABN, the payer may need to withhold an amount from the payment for that supply. This is referred to as the no ABN withholding. Oh, well that's a problem. How much are they going to withhold? If your goods or services are over $75, then the company that you're dealing with needs to withhold the top tax rate. And what is the top tax rate right now? Well, that is 45 cents or 45% that they would need to withhold. So I don't have an ABN, but what if I'm applying for one I just hasn't come through yet? If a supplier has applied for an ABN, you can offer to hold the payment until they have attained that and quoted it to you. Then you give it back to them. But let's face it, hobbies don't have ABNs, so you wouldn't be applying for one in the first place. But then what do? They're going to withhold money from you if you're running a hobby because you can't give them the ABN, but you're not entitled to an ABN because you're running a hobby. It's an exhaustive circle. Well, there is a solution. Certain suppliers are not required to have an ABN. This is you if you're a hobby, and you fill out a statement by a supplier form, which looks like this. Essentially, you tick the boxes that apply to you below. The payer is not making a payment in the course of carrying on an enterprise. Enterprise is secret code for business, so make sure that is ticked. If your payment doesn't exceed $75, then automatically you're exempt regardless. A supply is made with an individual or partnership without a reasonable expectation of a profit or gain. It's rather vague, but you can tick that if you are a hobby. The supplier is not entitled to an ABN. No, because you're not a business, therefore you're not entitled to one. If you fill in that form, then the business that you're providing a service or business to should not withhold any tax money from you. I noticed on that form there were words about not expecting to make a profit. Does that mean if I'm in the first year or two of business and I'm not making a profit, then I'm automatically a hobby? No, it doesn't mean that. Because even businesses do not necessarily have to make profits. It's whether you're carrying yourself in a business-like manner and acting like a business, not whether you're making a profit, that determines whether you're in fact a business that's not making a profit or whether you're a hobby who's also not making a profit. Another test of whether you actually got a hobby or a business is the size and scale of what you're carrying out. Is it like a typical business in that sector or is it not? Here's your chook house. See the chickens? Aren't they lovely? This is what a commercial setup looks like. If you're selling a few eggs to the neighbour, then you're definitely a hobby because you look nothing like a proper business. If you're a business, it is expected that your activity is organised and carried out in a business-like manner, and one of the examples of that is having a separate business bank account. If you're running a business, it's essential that you have a separate business bank account so that you can separate that from your private money and you can see the money coming in, you can see the expenses going out, and therefore you can do your tallies. If you're running a hobby, no, you don't need that. In fact, the more separated you are, the more business-like you look, and the more combined you are, then you're just really doing a hobby, aren't you? Another test is whether you're operating from separate premises. So if you're operating from home, then you're much more likely to be a hobby. If you've got a separate little factory or shed that is not your home and not a part of your home, then invariably you're probably a business anyway. But if you're operating from home, it does not mean that you're not a business, because if you're, say, an accountant, then you could operate from a spare bedroom, maybe have a separate door or whatever, then you would be a legitimate business. But if you're baking a few goods from home or selling a few veggies out of your garden, no, you don't have a separate premises and therefore you probably are just a hobby. What are the pros and cons of being a business versus a hobby? Let's take a look. If you're a hobby, you do not need to declare the amounts that you get in payments. If you're a business, absolutely you do. If you're a hobby, you can't claim tax deductions because, well, you're not paying tax in the first place. If you're a business, you can claim deductions for your expenses, but you generally need an ABN to do that. And if you're a hobby, don't keep tax records. But if you are a business, then absolutely you need to. But there is one rule that applies to hobbies as well as businesses. If you're selling goods, you need to comply with Australian consumer law. Your consumers have the automatic right, if they buy a product that breaks easily, doesn't work, or doesn't perform as expected, to get their money back. That law applies if you're running a business, you probably know that already, but also if you're running a hobby, that law applies as well. Let's say that your hobby has grown and you're conducting yourself, or you're starting to, in a business-like manner, and you say earning $15,000 a year. Does that make you a hobby or a business? Well, it could make you a business, but if you don't have another job and you come under the tax-free threshold, then you still won't pay tax, even though you're conducting yourself like a business. The tax-free threshold at the moment is $18,200. If you don't have a job at all, then you've got your full $18,200 in order to play with. On the other hand, if you have a job or a part-time job, then you have to add the two together, and if you go over $18,200, then you have to pay tax. I have explained to you the series of duck tests that you need to go down to see whether you quack like a business or whether you're like a hobby. But who determines who gets to make the final choice? Well, you do. You can read through the regulations and decide whether you're in fact more like a hobby or a business. But if you decide that you're a hobby, then when the ATO comes knocking, if they do, you need to have a justification of why you are a hobby and not a business. But if you're a hobby, you do not have to register or report yourself as a hobby. There's nothing like that. It's all determined by you. Although it's tax time, do not submit your tax return until after the 23rd of August. Click here to find out why.